Okay. Okay, Caroline, you're on.
Are there people listening? Do we have a? Oh, yeah.
I see 45 participants. Oh, 50 now.
I'm going to give it one more minute.
Sure.
And we'll get started. Oh, 79 now. Okay, well, it's just about 3:15, so we're going to get through some introductions and through some housekeeping things and get things rolling here. Good afternoon. My name is Caroline Jones-Lico, and I'm with the RCPA Conference Committee. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you to the 2020 annual RCPA Conference. As strange as it may be this way, but we're here and making the best of it. You are in Understanding and Promoting Everyday Human Interactions. This is P3. You are muted, so if you have any questions, please don't use the chat. Please use the Q&A, and I'll be monitoring that. And at the end, we're going to say 15 minutes at the end of the presentation, and I will share your questions with Dana as they come up at the end. All the handouts for any workshops that you may be attending are available on the mobile app. There aren't handouts for this one. So correct, Dana? There aren't handouts? Right.
That's correct.
Please make sure you complete the evaluations for all the workshops that you attend and the one for the conference. As a conference committee, we do read every comment, we read every evaluation. We use those from year to year to try to make the conference experience better for everybody as we move on. And we do share information with the presenters so that they can take that to their next presentations. If you want CEs, you need to make sure that you complete the electronic verification found on the RCPA conference website. It has to be done by October 8th. Please make sure you do the overall evaluation. You'll get certificates of attendance at the end, and CEs will come via email when the conference is over. It's my pleasure to introduce Dana Winters from Fred Rogers Center for Early Learning and Children's Media at St. Vincent College. Dana? Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Tempt technology here with some sharing of screens. All right, good afternoon. I'm really excited to be here with you in whatever shape that takes. Seems like being together, it takes on brand new meaning now, but I'm excited to be with you and to spend the next hour thinking a little bit more about the power of human interactions and human relationships. As CJ mentioned, I am from the Fred Rogers Center for Early Learning and Children's Media at St. Vincent College in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, so about an hour east of Pittsburgh. And Latrobe was Fred's hometown. So when we think of Fred Rogers, it is that Mr. Rogers from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. So the Fred Rogers Center is in the original Mr. Rogers neighborhood, not too far from where Fred grew up. At the center, we have an exhibit to Fred's life where you can take a look at what it was like for him in Latrobe growing up, all the way through his television career and then to the legacy of the Fred Rogers Center now, where we work to serve children's helpers and to advance Fred's legacy in a number of ways. One of the most exciting parts, I think, of the Fred Rogers Center is that we do house the Fred Rogers Archive, which to date is about 22,000 cataloged items from Fred's life. So that's everything from the scripts from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood to the music compositions to the letters that he wrote, the letters that he received, and all of his speeches that he gave in his many years of public service. It's quite a lot of items, and our archivist is always receiving something new, but it's definitely a foundation for all of us to think about how we extend the legacy of such a and an influential man, not just in child development, but in human development. It was Fred who said that it's through relationships that we learn best and grow best. And that's something that we take to heart at the center, that the building of relationships between adults and children, between adults and between children, are the foundation for all development that is to come and serve us well beyond our childhood years. Now, at the center, we don't work directly with children, but we work with those helpers in many different contexts around the world. If there are children and adults together, we like to think of all of those relationships as helping relationships. And the idea of helpers comes directly from Fred Rogers himself, actually from his mom. When we think of probably one of the most memorable and well-known quotes that we hear from Fred Rogers, it's one that's been circulating a great deal in the last 7 or 8 months, which was when he was a young boy and he was afraid. He went to his mother and asked, "Mom, what do I do when I'm scared? What do I do when I'm afraid?" And his mom told him to always look for the helpers. You'll always find someone helping. Now, the Fred Rogers Center is located on the campus of St. Vincent College, and so I teach a few courses there, and one of those courses is a class on Fred. And in that course, I ask the students to pick their favorite Fred Rogers quote and to work with our archivist and to look in the archive to find what is there around that quote in the original context, the original source, what can we learn from it still today? And the look for the helpers quote was one that I had done this originally before I asked any of my students to do, because I thought that there has to be something just a little bit more to it. That why? Why do we always look for the helpers? Why do we always find people helping? Why is that helpful in times of uncertainty, when we're scared, when we're afraid? And what I found was that when Fred told the original story, he went on to say that his mother told him to always look for the helpers, because when you look for the helpers and you see people helping, you'll know that there is hope. And I think that's a message that we need now more than ever, is that our helpers provide that hope. And regardless of what that helping looks like and where our helpers are, we continue to feel hope for the good work that they're doing, for the protection that they provide for us, for the relationships that they build with us. And that's why our work with the helpers spans so many developmental contexts, so many geographic locations, because it's affirming and promoting and understanding the role of the helpers that gives us so much hope. The work that I'd like to talk a little bit with you today is work over the last decade that has spanned a number of those contexts and geographic locations. And I'd like to share with you some of the lessons that we've learned from working with helpers, whether that be in family childcare or in childcare centers, whether that be in orphanage environments overseas, or maybe in public schools here in the United States and in China and other countries. Maybe that's in schools that help populations of children and adults and youth who are deaf or maybe have special needs and disabilities. The work that we've done through children's hospitals or hospitals for children and youth with traumatic brain injuries, that all of these helpers have taught us so much about what it means to give hope and what it means to build relationships and have interactions with children, with one another, with adults, that continue to show that development and learning and growing happens best through relationships, and that it's no accident that these interactions and relationships are primary in all that we do. So today, this afternoon, I'd like to share 3 lessons I've learned about human relationships. I've been reflecting on this, especially since March, because at that point, when you're used to thinking about helpers, helping has taken on a very different tone, a very different way since March. And while that does look a little bit different, I think what we found is that the lessons we've learned from helpers and the lessons we've learned about the importance of human relationships are all the more true now. That these still hold true regardless of the uncertainties and conditions around us. So the first lesson I'd like to share is the lesson that having at least one matters. Now, I showed you some of the locations where we've worked with helpers and we've begun to promote and affirm and think about human relationships to help adults and children interact together, adults and youth interact together, adults and adults interact together. And one of the more unlikely places where we have promoted and worked and highlighted human interactions and relationships are in the crosswalks in the city of Pittsburgh. This is one of those projects where it's a very unlikely place when you think of where should we go to highlight the power of human interactions and relationships. But the crossing guards throughout the city of Pittsburgh show us exactly that and demonstrate what it means to be an at least one in the life of a child or a family or an adult. Now, the crossing guards in the city of Pittsburgh have a little bit of a different reporting structure than most crossing guards. A lot of crossing guards report directly to school systems. They're employees of the school district, and they are a part of the school system. Now, in Pittsburgh, the crossing guards are not employees of the school district. They are employees of the Bureau of Public Safety in the city of Pittsburgh. So they are in the same group as police officers, the detectives. The chief of police is the ultimate head of the Bureau of Public Safety. So it means that their work takes on a slightly different meaning. When they are trained, they're given their reflective gear and their stop sign and their white gloves. They're taught the proper way to stop traffic. And then their success in their outcomes are measured in pedestrian safety. But when we started to look at the work of crossing guards, especially those who are closer to schools or those who have the responsibility of crossing children, especially in the mornings and in the afternoons, we were struck that they did so much more than just safely cross children and families from one corner of the street to the other. So I'd like to introduce you to Miss Paula, who was one of those crossing guards who did so much more than just safely cross children from one side of the street to the other. And I'd like you to think a little bit about what do you notice about what she does when this is not necessarily a part of her job description.
Good morning. I like you here. Go ahead. Where's your jacket at?
I'm not cold.
You ain't cold? Okay. What's your, I know, see, you got a jacket, huh? He said, I am. Good morning. She's grown up to be so beautiful. Look at her. Wow. I know. Wow. She looks just like you. That's your twin right there. Oh my. Good morning. Y'all go to the high school?
Yes.
All right. Have a blessed day.
Thank you.
You're welcome, baby. And your lips is shivering.
All we care is about you.
That's it. Me too. That's the worst time when my face is cold. Yeah, I feel like, oh, mama, shh. I wish I could just warm you up. But it's just like my hairs are good. Okay.
My face is cold.
Well, hurry up in then. It's time to go in, okay? Good morning.
Right.
Good morning. So, House, when are you going to know about the election? When you going to know if you won or not?
Okay.
Oh, huh. I got my fingers crossed for you. Even though I didn't get a cupcake, but I got my fingers crossed. Good morning, guys. Oh, your nails. Let me see your nails. All right, now. Let me see y'all of yours. All right, now. Go now. Your bad self. You cold?
Fall baby.
You a fall baby?
Yeah, my birthday's November.
See, I hold traffic for you. Good morning, baby girl. I like your little bun. Your mom did your hair? Tell her I give her 100%.
So that's Miss Paula. Now, I did not pick the one nice crossing guard out of the 110 in the city of Pittsburgh to show you. There were a lot who did this every morning and every afternoon. And they refer to themselves as the early morning street parents because they've taken it upon themselves to make sure that children are shown that they matter, that children are noticed, that they're acknowledged, that they're heard every single morning and every single afternoon. Miss Paula uses 5-10 seconds to say good morning, to ask a question, to remember and notice things about the children. The fact that she knew that the one child's nail colors had changed, that's pretty impressive. Asking about the election, sending a message back to mom that, hey, your hair looks pretty good. Tell your mom I give her 100%. That through these little interactions, Miss Paula's building a relationship with each one of these children. And you better believe she knows when one isn't there. That she knows exactly who they are, where they've come from, where they're going. And even if she didn't know, she knows that each one of those children deserve to hear good morning before they enter that school. And they deserve to hear it from her. Now, Miss Paula wasn't necessarily aware of the difference that she was making. That when I sat down with her and with her fellow crossing guards and I showed her a video of what it looked like and just a morning of her day, and she heard her colleagues say, wow, that was great what you just did there. She broke down in tears. She didn't realize, she just said, that's just what I do. But I don't think she realized how incredibly important it is, especially to the lives of those children who cross in front of her every single day. There was one young man who safely crossed the street and then came back to talk to me because I'm standing there with a camera. And he said to me, Miss Paula wasn't here last week and I didn't know what to do. I said, wow, crossing the street was difficult? And he said, no, she wasn't here to say good morning and my whole day felt off. That's a pretty big difference right there. And there were countless stories from the crossing guards of families and children who had come to them for help, knowing that they could be trusted, knowing that they were safe and secure there, and knowing that they had a relationship, even if it was built in the smallest of moments. And that's what it means to be at least one. So the term at least one comes to us from research literature. And there was a few years back a meta-analysis of all of the decades of research around resilience. What does it take to be resilient? What does it take to build resilience in children and adults? And there was one finding that was common across decades of research, and it was that children who ended up doing well have all had at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive parent, caregiver, or other adult. That's pretty powerful, that at least one stable and committed relationship. Now, what that isn't saying is that it has to be the same adult from the beginning to the end, but that there are stable and committed relationships that come in and out of children's lives. And as long as there's at least one that, as Fred Rogers said, when the gusty winds blow and shake our lives, if we know someone cares about us, we may bend with the wind, but we won't break. So the presence of at least one really matters. And I think it matters even more now that we've lost our ability to have chance meetings. Sometimes a lot of us are working from home and not in the office and not walking the halls to have those chance meetings with others, but that we can be intentional about being that at least one for someone else and making sure that we have that at least one for the children and youth and families in our lives. That's what truly makes a difference, especially in these uncertain times. That if we want children to be resilient, that we've got to shower them with relationships. We have to provide that buffer, that barrier from the gusty winds to help them bend, but not break. And Miss Paula is doing that in just small moments every single day. So that's the first lesson that I think I've learned about human relationships from watching helpers, is that at least one really does matter. The second lesson that I've learned from years working with helpers, and that I think I've learned about human relationships, is that when you ask somebody, what is a relationship, you're going to get a blank stare and sometimes big eyes, because relationships, we would have 169, 170 different answers to that question right now with all of us just here today. And relationships seem big, and sometimes relationships can seem scary. But the power of human relationships comes from simple, ordinary, everyday interactions. It's what we saw with Miss Paula, that those relationships were built one interaction at a time, and they weren't all that long. They certainly weren't complex, but they were what Fred Rogers would call deep and simple. And we know that deep and simple is far more essential than shallow and complex. That it's simple for her to say good morning every morning, but it's deeply felt by the children who cross the street. It's simple for her to ask about the election, but it's deeply felt by that young lady who was waiting to hear whether or not she won. That it's those deep and simple moments that give us the building blocks of human relationships. Now, I'd like to take you to a place where our work started, which is a small village outside of Qingdao, China, where in this village, the community of about 400 farming families decided that they would welcome nearly 100 orphans into their homes. This is the village we call a foster village, because when the orphanages were overflowing in the cities, these families said, we will foster orphans in our home, and we'll use a building in the middle of town as a school where the children can come together during the day and then come home to us in the evenings. And all of these children had some type of physical or cognitive disability, and they were welcomed into the homes of all of these farming villagers. And when we visit this foster village every year, with the exception of this year, for the last 8 or 9 years, we are consistently struck by what it looks like to watch human relationships being built under conditions and resources that are very difficult, and under places that you would think are a little unlikely to find relationships growing. But it's in these types of places especially that we see those simple, ordinary moments become so deeply felt and so deeply important. I'd like to play just 30 seconds of what an interaction looks like this is the preschool classroom in the foster village, because I think these 30 seconds can teach us even more about what is possible in the simplest of moments. just 30 seconds. Now, my favorite thing to do is when I play that clip, I've seen it thousands of times and I was there to see it originally, but my favorite thing is to watch other people watch this clip, which makes this process a little difficult since I can't actually see you. But I imagine what you look like when you watch that clip, that you're smiling right along with the children. When the tissue paper gets stuck to the little boy's lip, you laugh right alongside all of them. But in those 30 seconds, we see so much of what it means to have an interaction that contributes to a relationship. That just in those 30 seconds of a very simple everyday interaction, we're able to see connection between the adult and the children, among the children, that they're all engaged together, that they're connecting with mutual matched happy affect in this one, but that they are truly connected in what they're doing in this activity with a broken pen and a piece of tissue paper. We're able to see among the children and with the adult a sense of reciprocity, of serve and return, of give and take, of a balancing of roles within this activity in just 30 seconds interacting. That they all have a role to play and they play it and they do that together in a way that shows that nobody's really in control, that everybody has their own engagement role with what they're doing. We see in these 30 seconds beautiful acts of inclusion by the adult and also by the children, that you can probably tell that the most able child within this is the child in the middle who's holding the pen. The little boy on the right has no use of his hands, and the little girl on the lap is about 6 years old, but she functions at about a 6-month level. And so inclusion is so very important for each one of these children to grow a sense of belonging, to be involved in this interaction. The adult is a physical source of inclusion for that young girl. And the child in the middle is making sure everybody has a chance to see the pen and to blow on the tissue paper and to be a part of the interaction that's happening. It's so very important to see that while they may all have different needs, they all belong in these 30 seconds. That there is such a beautiful act of including and involving and inviting and a beautiful sense of belonging. And finally, we see, even in 30 seconds, multiple opportunities to grow for these children. Physical opportunities to grow for the child in the lap, to have an opportunity to sit up and to watch and to turn her head, which is very difficult for her to do. Opportunities for sharing, for turn taking. There's so much just in 30 seconds of a moment that at first glance is so simple. But when you really think about it, is so very, very deep as well. And that's the power of these interactions, is that they build relationships, and that even in 30 seconds of the seemingly simplest interaction you can imagine, so much is happening to make it possible and to make it an opportunity for growing these relationships. Fred Rogers talked about how these types of relationships and the trust that's involved, like what we just saw, it doesn't happen by accident. And there are absolutely no shortcuts to making it happen. We have to put in the hard work of these interactions to build relationships. But it's so worth it because we know that it's through relationships that we grow best and learn best. And that doesn't stop when childhood ends. That we all grow best and learn best through relationships. And that growing and learning happens in so many ways. It's not just academic learning. It's not just cognitive growth. Social, emotional growing, relational growing, physical growing. It all happens best in the context of a relationship. And we know that the power of those relationships comes from stringing together moments that look just like what we saw from Miss Paula, just like what we saw in the foster village. Simple but deep moments of interactions. So that second lesson, I'm always surprised that regardless of context, regardless of where I happen to be, I can see those interactions contributing to relationships everywhere. As I walk through the grocery store, or whether it's a part of my job, I see it all the time, and I see it everywhere. And I'm reminded by the importance of all of these moments. Now, when you're reminded about the importance of all of these moments, sometimes it can feel a little overwhelming. What happens if I get a moment wrong? I've got two children. I've got a 10 and a 6-year-old. And when the pandemic came through in March, I suddenly went from being a traveling mom to being a work from home mom and supportive virtual teacher for a fourth grader and a kindergartner. And I can tell you that there were a lot of moments that did not look perfect. And even now, 7 months later, there are still a lot of moments that aren't quite perfect. But the last lesson I've learned from helpers and the last lesson I've learned from human relationships is that not everything has to be perfect in order to be helpful. That this is another line that Fred Rogers reminds us of. And it's been very comforting to me, but it's also been very resonant in the work that we've done, is that there is no perfect interaction. And it doesn't have to be perfect in order to be effective or to be helpful. And especially now when all of these circumstances around our lives are so very uncertain and far from perfect, it's important to remember that it doesn't have to be perfect to be helpful. Now, so much has changed in the last 7 or 8 months. The outsides of how we do the work that we do has shifted and changed and shifted and changed multiple times just this year alone. And that was something that when we think of how life changes and how the outsides of our lives change, it's important to remember that the insides, well, they remain the same. That when Fred Rogers would be asked, how can the lessons that you taught children in the 1960s and 70s still be relevant today? He would say, sure, the outsides of childhood have changed. Children have a lot of different pressures on them, a lot of new things, but the insides of childhood remain the same. And that's something that we've tried our best to remember during these uncertain times, is that the outsides of how we do our work, yeah, that's changed a lot. But the insides of why, that still remains the same. That while we're faced with many signs and many things that say that the way we're used to doing things or normally doing things, well, those ways are closed. It doesn't mean that we can't find a way to continue to serve the insides, even when the outsides look very different. When I see all of these closed signs and doors being closed, I'm reminded of the metaphor of the closed door that I think is attributed to a lot of different religious traditions, but I also learned about it when reading a book, the autobiography, the memoir of Helen Keller, who had a number of doors closed to her. And she goes on to say that, when one door closes, another opens. But often we look so hard and for so long at that closed door that we do not see the one which has been opened for us. Now, there are a lot of doors closed right now, but it doesn't mean that they'll be closed forever. And it doesn't mean that there aren't open doors somewhere for us to continue to engage in the work and to continue to build relationships and have interactions with others, even through a mask, even through a screen, that we're able to have these interactions and to build relationships still. That yes, there are doors that are closed, and yes, the conditions right now are imperfect, but it doesn't have to be perfect in order to be effective. Fred, this quote is one that is on my wall and one that I remember very closely because it's comforting to me to see that Fred Rogers had challenges and struggled as a parent and a caregiver as well, and that he saw that he wanted to be able to give more all the time and was constantly worried if he had done enough. And I think it's something that we as helpers, whether as parents or educators or caregivers, whatever our role happens to be in helping, often worry that we're not giving enough, that we're not able to do enough. And that even though the world around us is imperfect, it doesn't have to be perfect for us to be effective. And that's the lesson that I think we can carry through during these very uncertain times, is that sure, there are a lot of closed doors. And yes, the conditions around us are very imperfect, but we can still be helpful. We can still be effective. We can still find ways to serve the insides of our needs that remain the same. So those are the 3 lessons that we've learned from children's helpers and helpers around the world, that having at least one really matters. That the power of these relationships come from very simple, ordinary, everyday moments, and that these interactions and we as the people in these interactions don't have to be perfect in order to be helpful. And we're reminded that when we look for helpers, when we see people helping, when we are the helpers ourselves, that provides so much hope, especially in times of tragedy, uncertainty, and challenge. Now, that was one of the most frequent times when we heard from Fred Rogers, was in times of challenge in our country. He would come out and help us as adults to work with children, to help them to understand what was happening and to guide them, to provide hope and help. And it's something that Fred saw as being a helpful appreciator. And it's something that even in small ways we can do for children, for families, for one another, in all walks of life. And for Fred, what it meant to be a helpful appreciator is that he said that there must be times when you wonder what in the world you can do for a certain child or a certain family, yet you wanted so much to be of service that little by little, the answer often comes to you, and you discover the way to be that helpful appreciator, which invariably makes the difference. No matter how primitive our resources may be, the greatest thing we can do is to find what is healthy and laudable about somebody else and reflect that to them. It's a large assignment to help people look deep within themselves and find what is wonderful there, because at the core of everyone is someone wonderful. And that's what it meant to be a helpful appreciator in Fred's words. And it's what it means to be a helper in so many different contexts and ways of life right now. Fred would talk often about acknowledging people as being more than just one thing, being able to look past maybe the outward presence of who somebody is or the many things that they offer, to be able to see beyond and acknowledge more than one thing, to be able to see beyond and reflect goodness, to be able to see what is healthy and laudable about somebody else. And it's something that we can do in all the ways that we help others. And it's a tall order to be able to do, or as Fred calls it, a large assignment, but it's worth it to have those simple interactions that build people up instead of tear people down. And it's part of building what we would hope would be a community that is built upon these types of relationships and interactions that build support for one another and that provide these touch points of interaction and relationship for children and adults to grow together. We have a vision for what this can look like when we engage families and build communities in a relationship-based way. That oftentimes it starts with a child or it starts with a family, and that we hope that that child has relationships and interactions with others. And it begins with a caregiver inside the home, that a family caregiver is providing these relationships and interactions for children. And then there are so many helpers, the list is endless, outside of the home that provide relationships and interactions for children as well. Because if we believe that the best thing that we can do for children is to surround them in an environment of relationships, that that's what activates all learning and growing, then we need to be doing our best to make sure we're supporting these relationships within the home and outside of the home as well. Which means that these relationships can't just go one way, that we need the helpers and the caregivers inside the home to be building these relationships as well, these partnerships that are more than just transactional, but really truly support one another in these types of interactions and relationships. Now, this right here can be enough for a child to learn and grow. But we are firm believers that to truly make an impact on children, we can't skip over the needs of the adults. And we know that adults need this same support, that they need support to be able to build these relationships. They need interactions and relationships that help them to learn and grow in whatever it is they may be doing. And our helpers need those relationships too. And we can't forget that as children grow, they're having those relationships with their peers as well. That if at all of these touch points, we're infusing that helpful appreciation, those relationships and interactions, the simple moments that help us to learn and grow together, then we're engaging these families and building communities in ways that are focused in relationships and focused on the thriving of every single person who's a part of that community. Now, nobody has the responsibility of making sure that they affect this entire system. That's unreasonable to expect. But we can all identify ourselves somewhere here, maybe in a couple of different heads, and that's okay. We all have our own touch point. We all make our own ripple to be able to set off interactions and relationships that grow across this entire system. That we all have a responsibility to be thinking about how our interactions and relationships can continue to serve the broader support in engaging families and building communities. And to do that, it helps to think of all of the decisions that we're making, all of the practices and policies and programs that we're putting into place, and how they serve the greater meaning and need for relationships and interactions among one another, among children, among adults and children, among families, among helpers. And it's something that we think about in our work as well. How are we encouraging, enriching, and empowering these human interactions around children and their helpers? That especially in times of uncertainty, in times of challenge, in times of adversity, it's so important to make sure that our children and families and adults are showered with these relationships and interactions that help to build resilience, that help them to continue to learn and to grow with one another, which means that the decisions that we're making in good times and in bad should all be serving to encourage, enrich, and empower human interactions. And these are decisions that are made at every single level. Regardless of what your role happens to be, you can make decisions and put policies and programs and practices in place that encourage the likelihood of the development of these relationships. And it's not hard to look at what we're doing, how we're acting, and why we're doing what we're doing, to think about how it can better serve these interactions and relationships. And this is something that we can be even more intentional about now, as physical distancing is disrupting much of what we see in that previous picture. That since COVID has happened, that something that has changed is that physical distancing and changes to the way that we do our work have resulted in a disruption to that vision of how we do relationship-based growing, of how we engage families and build communities. Right now, and for the last few months, it may feel a little more like this, that our families may be spending more time together, our helpers may feel isolated from how best to help others. And it's definitely something that is unprecedented in our times. When I talk with helpers in some of the contexts where we've worked and I ask them, how has your life changed since COVID? The first thing I hear is that they feel more isolated, that they don't feel the support that they once had. So how do we rebuild that? How do we rebuild the support around our helpers? How do we make sure we're not ignoring the needs of the adults in the middle, those who are working every day to support others? I truly believe it begins by rebuilding and strengthening the communities around our helpers, that we give them a place to continue to learn and grow and think. One thing I learned over the last 8 months is that there is no handbook of how to get through a global pandemic. And there is certainly no research that is ready for us to put into place. We're used to research-based programs and research-based practices, but research isn't going to catch up to our needs right now. We have to rely on the practice of one another. We have to rely on sharing the challenges, sharing the successes, and just being able to share our needs and our concerns with one another, to be able to learn and grow through our interactions and relationships in ways that continue to support one another. That strengthening support for helpers and families starts with each one of us, to reach out and to make sure our helpers are okay, to give them a place to think, to give them a place to share, to give them a place to test what they're doing and then talk about it and find if we can see how we put things together to be effective in very imperfect times. When we have these supports in place, we then have an opportunity to reach out again, to reestablish our relationship with families and those who we're supporting, whoever that might be, that we can continue to sustain and to build anew relationships that will continue to grow and to help others through these trying times as well. That we can support our families in the ways that they engage with children or with those who they are supporting as well. That if we continue to rebuild what it means to support one another, even in times that look very different, that strength will continue to ripple and we can rebuild our entire picture. But we can't do that if we're not thinking of the needs of one another. We can't do that if we aren't reaching out to be at least one. If we aren't reaching out to show those simple, everyday interactions that build human relationships. And if we aren't acknowledging that, yes, doors are closed and things are imperfect, but we can still find ways to be helpful and effective together. And that gives us a chance to start our ripples going again, to rebuild that support and rebuild communities and re-engage with families to be able to strengthen one another. It's through that connection that we're going to build resilience and that we're going to come out on the other side even stronger. And this is something that isn't just for right now, that while this time of uncertainty and adversity is temporary, these are lessons that transcend the needs and challenges and resources that we might be facing right now. These are lessons that transcend context and transcend location. That to be resilient against uncertainty and adversity, it means that every one of these human connections, they matter even more. And that the power of these human connections are going to come from simple, ordinary moments that may look a little bit different now, but are still absolutely possible. That the outsides of those moments may look a little different, but the insides of why we do them and the insides of how we do them remain the same. And so what it does is it shifts a bit our question to think about not just the interactions, but how those interactions can continue to serve connections and support for one another, for families, for children, for helpers, that the decisions that we're making can still encourage, enrich, and empower human connection, even when human connection takes place in very, very different ways. That just because the doors of our typical modes of connection may seem closed, that there are open doors all around us to be able to walk through and to meet people on the other side and to come together, to work together, to support one another in the work that we do. So I've taken the lessons I've learned from the work of helpers with children. And while they are so very important for work between adults and children, they are so very important for work between adults as well. Not just in the helping that we do, in the supporting of those that are a part of the work that we do, but in the supporting of one another to continue to do this work as well. That when Fred Rogers said it's through relationships that we learn best and grow best, he wasn't talking just about children. That each one of us learns best, grows best, thrives, and can show resilience when we are filled with human relationships and interactions, or when we just have one. Now, Fred Rogers didn't talk to adults about these things all that much. He talked to children about all of these concepts, and even watching Mr. Rogers now as an adult, I think, wow, still got a lot to learn from Fred. Now, he did talk directly to adult audiences when there would be times of tragedy and challenge and struggle in our country. The first time he did this was he made a special episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood to help adults talk with children about the assassination of Bobby Kennedy. And then he did public service addresses in times of tragedy, such as the Challenger explosion when the Gulf War started, September 11th, that he would come to talk to adults about how they can best support children. But when he talked to adults about how they can best support children, so many of those messages can transfer to how adults can best support themselves and one another as well. The message I'd like to share with you, just to end my talking part of today before we get to any questions, comments you may have, is a video that was a part of a public service address that Fred gave after September 11th. This particular clip was the 1-year anniversary of September 11th, where he came back to talk with adults about the continued challenges and uncertainties and struggles and how they can best help children through them. Now, this would have been in September of 2002, and Fred passed away in February of 2003. So this would have been one of the last times that we saw Fred in public. And it's a very brief message, and one that I've always come back to and to share, but one that I think takes on new meaning in the uncertainties and challenges that we're facing in this year of 2020. And so I'd like to share with you Fred's message to the helpers of gratitude and thanks for the work that they do and the work that all of you do as well.
You know, it happens so often. I walk down the street and someone 20 or 30 or 40 years old will come up to me and say, "You are Mr. Rogers, aren't you?" And then they tell me about growing up with the neighborhood and how they're passing on to the children they know what they found to be important in our television work. like expressing their feelings through music and art and dance and sports and drama and computers and writing, and invariably we end our little time together with a hug. I'm just so proud of all of you who have grown up with us, and I know how tough it is some days to look with hope and confidence on the months and years ahead. But I would like to tell you what I often told you when you were much younger. I like you just the way you are. And what's more, I'm so grateful to you for helping the children in your life to know that you'll do everything you can to keep them safe and to help them express their feelings in ways that will bring healing in many different neighborhoods. It's such a good feeling to know that we're lifelong friends.
So I thank you for the work that you do in supporting others, the work that will invariably bring healing to so many neighborhoods, and in the work that you do to continue to invest and to communicate and to connect and to interact in even the simplest of ways that will continue to grow human relationships, to empower, enrich, and encourage all of us as we learn and grow together. So thank you very much. We've got a little bit of time left that I will unshare my screen here to see if we have any questions or comments that I can answer or tend to before our time is through.
Dana, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
I don't know if you could see the questions. Well, mostly throughout your presentation have just been comments about how awesome and passionate you are and how clear it is that you are passionate about what you do. One question that was more of a comment about staff fitting into the helper category, but concerned about the regulatory environment that we operate in and the expectations of perfection that often drive people away from our system. Again, the person's not sure if it's a question or just a comment, but wanted to make that statement.
It's very true. And I think that's affecting helpers in a number of contexts that we see the pressures of systems that sometimes are hard for us to continue to do the helping that we know is right. And I think, the more that we think about that and talk about that is that, we truly believe in the power of being able to be a helper and still exist within those systems, as hard as that may be. That sometimes that falls back on Fred Rogers' line of the deep and simple is far more essential than the shallow and complex. And that even those complexities are there. It's not that we can do away with them as much as sometimes we might want to, but that we can favor what's more essential to them, if that's possible, which is the helping and the relationships that we have that can fit within, but becomes far more essential than maybe the checklists and regulations that we have. So I don't know, I certainly don't have an answer to your comment or question, but to know that yes, that's in all of the places that we work, we're seeing that the regulations and the systems that are imposing things that seem counter to our nature of helping too.
Just a comment from one of our administrator friends in Allegheny County, a simple yet profound message for our times, inspiring, encouraging, and hopeful.
Thank you. I think I'm consistently struck by the resilience of our helpers right now and the work that they continue to do throughout all of this, that so many of them have not stopped. And, that's what provides so much hope that, when Fred's mom said that the helpers give us hope, I absolutely agree. So thank you all for continuing the helping and the providing of that hope for so many.
Someone just wrote, this presentation and Ms. Paula's clip have encouraged me to just say good morning to all of my residents individually when I enter the building in the morning and to increase my interactions with them consistently. So mission accomplished.
Well, yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And that's, that's a part of the work that we do. What I've shared with you today is a larger body of work that we call simple interactions, which is an approach to affirming these relationships and interactions that is a part of what we do at the Fred Rogers Center. And a part of that is to help people to look at what they're already doing well and to build intentionality around it. So if we're already building these relationships and having these interactions, and like Miss Paula, maybe we're unaware of how good we are, it allows us to bring some intention to that, which I think is really important, the consistency of those interactions. So thank you for sharing that.
That is all the questions we have at the moment.
Okay.
Does anyone have anything else? I know
If
I
I
forgot
might-
to, go ahead.
If I might just ask Dana, this is Sharon.
Sure.
Since Fred Rogers obviously had great messages to give to everyone after 9/11, such a huge tragedy, do you have any thoughts on how you think he might tailor his message today to address the great divide that seems to be plaguing so many of us?
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. I said the number of times that we've heard in the last, oh, I'm sorry.
I know it's a big question.
It is, but the number of times we've been asked in the last 8 months, what do you think Fred would do about right now? I can only imagine how busy he would have been. But I think, when we look back at the life and philosophy and legacy of Fred Rogers, he was always about this just genuine appreciation and kindness and compassion toward people. And for him, kindness wasn't necessarily just being nice. So when we talk about kindness in the legacy of Fred Rogers, it has so much more to do about empathy and compassion. About kindness for Fred was rooted in of the appreciation of every person is more than just one thing, and that getting to know what that is at the root of kindness. And I think that that's a message that he would really want to instill, which is kindness and empathy and seeing beyond maybe some of the differences that we have, that we are far more alike than we are different, and that we can find common ground through that compassion and kindness to think about those things. It's impossible to know exactly what he would say right now. But I do think that it would still be just firmly rooted in that radical kindness and radical compassion that he advocated.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'd like to thank you for your time and for your passion.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So if there's nothing else, I guess we'll stop.
Okay.
Okay.
right.
Thank you again.
Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. I appreciate it. And all the best for continued learning over the next few days.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.